Our mission, and we choose to accept it, is zero injuries and zero environmental impact. A healthy workforce and environment is key to our nation's continued success. The Mission Zero podcast is a deep dive with the industry's top experts into the health, safety, and environmental aspects of today's workplace. Our mission is to be a platform for new ideas and strategies that, when implemented, will improve our safety, our environment, and how we govern out business. We are making the world safer, and we're going to have fun doing it.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Mission Zero podcast. Today I have a timely and important guest. Dawayne Tipton is running for Texas Railroad Commission. Good morning, Dawayne.
Good morning.
Well, thank you for coming on. As you know, the Mission Zero podcast is a podcast that's very heavily invested into environmental issues and safety issues, and no really position is more important than the Texas Railroad Commissioner, as the Texas Railroad regulates all environmental all aspects with carbon extraction in the state of Texas. So, thank you for coming on and discussing these issues with us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
If you don't mind, Dawayne, for our audience, could you give a personal background, work background to what got you to this point, and a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So after graduating from college, I went to work out in Odessa as a roughneck. Even though I had an engineering degree because I needed the paycheck. With a lot of hard work and willingness to do what others wouldn't. I really moved through the ranks. I moved up, derrickman to driller to tool pusher, just working my way all through the drilling contractor side. And while I was doing that, I've had the opportunity to work on 4 continents. With some more hard work, this company reached out to me. It's one of the largest oil and gas insurers in the world. And they reached out to me and they brought me on as their subject matter expert. And while I was with them, I would take, various operators from the majors to the mid-level ones. And I would take all the stuff they had going on, look at all their safety paperwork, look at all their asset infrastructure and their maintenance logs. And then I would build out recommendations for them to improve their operations, or I would make recommendations to our underwriters to ensure that, either if they didn't make these changes, then we wouldn't insure them. After that position, I went to work for GE Oil and Gas, and I was tasked with tackling the offshore inspection and maintenance program after the Deepwater Horizon incident. So GE asked me if I could come up with the API 53 inspection-based program, and I did that for them. We brought it online. I was able to scale it up worldwide. So, just to sum it all up in 3 sentences, when it comes to oil and gas operations, I've either been the boots on the ground, the guy doing the job, or I'm the guy that's making recommendations to improve operators' operations. Project management and risk mitigation is a huge part of safety. And if you guys vote for me, like me, I'll bring that skill set to the Texas Railroad Commission.
Oh, okay. So that's very relevant, I guess, to what you're seeking to do, being involved in the inspections and whatnot. And before we dive into details on that, one thing we have in common, you and I, we're not native Texans. We came here by choice. I just passed, I think, a year and a half ago, living more than half my life in Texas. I'm from Georgia.
Okay.
So that's awesome to see someone else that came here and became a Texan. I bleed Texas. I'm a Texan, so that's awesome. But one thing I did notice about your history, you're very involved in veterans affairs. I'm a veteran, and I just wanted to briefly thank you for that, and thank you for helping with that stuff.
And it's really important to me to do that sort of stuff. It's one of the few times I'm at a loss for word, but it's a cause that's near and dear to me.
Great. All right, so moving forward on the actual the Texas Railroad Commission, in my past podcast with another candidate, we discussed the Texas Railroad Commission our audience may not be familiar with it, and I think a lot of people, even in Texas, aren't necessarily aware that the Texas Railroad Commission is responsible for what they're responsible for, right? And so, could you real quickly and briefly kind of explain what is the scope of the Texas Railroad Commission and what is the job of the commission?
Absolutely. So the job of the commission is to regulate the oil and gas industry, and that which includes they also have mining underneath their purview. And what that means, real simply, it means the oil and gas industry from exploration to production to refinement to the natural gas you get at your house. It all falls underneath the jurisdiction of the Railroad Commission. So they're the guiding light, the beacon that guides this $7 trillion industry.
Okay. Okay, and what did you see about? I mean, I guess a broad question and an open question. Why did you decide to run for this position?
Well, so I mean, there's several reasons, but what it comes down to mainly is I remember back in 2016 when we had the big bust and everybody was losing their jobs, and the majors laid off 250,000 workers in Houston. And I started reading some of the incumbent was running for office about that time, and I was reading some of his writings. And the more I read, the more I understood he didn't have any idea what he was talking about. He didn't have his finger on the pulse of the industry. He didn't understand how much these downturns affect the people, and he didn't have anything that he was able to do to help mitigate it. That's one of the things that the Railroad Commission is tasked with is keeping things on an even keel. You fast forward another 2 years, and
What do you mean by that even keel? Or you mean
so the even keel of the Railroad Commission, you've got two real mandates: being a steward of the environment, which I include, worker safety,
Mhm.
private property owners, and a catalyst for job creation. It's a very fine line that you have to balance.
Sure.
You need to steward of the environment and an advocate for job creation.
Mhm.
And he's just if it's a balancing scale, he's falling on both ends.
Okay. Okay. So it's interesting that you mentioned job creation. So is it in the purview of the Texas Railroad Commission to kind of you know, I guess I'll preface this by saying I worked, as a supplier for the oil industry, but only international for or mostly international for a while. I didn't see the giant swings internationally that I did in the United States. In other words, the peaks weren't as high and the valleys weren't as low. Is it in the purview of the Texas Railroad Commission to try to maintain that in Texas, to try to say, okay, let's don't overproduce and let's be ready to produce when we need to produce?
So they absolutely have the ability to for pro rationing. Uh, I'm a free market guy, so
Yeah.
sort of another COVID like event. That's not something I'd want to get into. But they do have the ability to offer permit breaks, incentives. There's several other avenues that they can do to keep workers working, keep exploration companies exploring, and you've got to know how to do that. You got to know what the costs are. You got to know you know we offer this permit break here. It does X, Y, Z. We're able to keep this amount of workers on. You've got to know the sum games of all what's going on. And Mr. Christian doesn't. He doesn't have that. But the furthermore of what really kicked off my campaign was the handling of Winter Storm Uri. I mean, it was absolutely disastrous. If we go back to when Winter Storm Uri was going on, Mr. Christian could have picked up the phone and implored ERCOT to ensure that when they were shedding load from the grid, that means when they were getting rid of the power, the rolling blackouts, he could have implored them not to cut off power to these critical natural gas infrastructure, which would have really kept our power generation problems getting as bad as they were. We wouldn't have had, if he'd done this, we wouldn't have had that huge 300% spike in natural gas prices. I'm sure there would have been it might have been 100%, it might have been 150%, but we wouldn't have got to 300%. And then you fast forward a year to where we are now, he's been blaming everybody. He's been doing whatever he's doing. What he hasn't been doing is he hasn't been taking care of Texans. There's no weatherization, winterization standard. There's no even critical load map for the natural gas infrastructure. They're not slating to have that done until 2023. You take politics aside, there's no reason that we shouldn't have a preliminary standard to give these natural gas companies and ensure that their resources are ready for the next winter storm. There's no reason that we can't have a preliminary critical path map so that when we have our next winter storm, we can do what we need to do to ensure that Texans aren't in the cold.
Gotcha.
If I am elected, I can assure you Texans will not be left out in the cold on my watch.
Well, that's interesting that you brought up the grid, because that's certainly one thing that I wanted to ask about. But I want to dig a little deeper and peel that onion back on that one a little bit more, because obviously that's one that just obviously came up right in the face of everybody. Right, that was a national, actually international story for what happened there. But before I get to that, a more broader question: um, what what do you see as the I guess the largest problems with the current commission? Like, what have they done wrong, per se, and are doing wrong? And what do you intend to do in office to correct those things?
Well, so I mean, the current commissioner, uh, his whole handling Winter Storm Uri's been wrong. If I'm elected, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put forward a winterization standard for the natural gas providers. Secondly, I'm going to get critical pad. Man, it's a mouthful. Basically, it's the natural gas grid that produces power. The pipelines that run to the natural gas power plants. I'm going to do that. But more importantly, whenever something happens, I'm going to be accountable. I'm going to be transparent, and I'm going to tackle the issues that come at me. We're not going to have some issue up if Dwayne Tipton is the next railroad commissioner. It's not going to be a year before we have results. I'm very results driven, and we've got to tackle these problems. Other problems that we currently have, the inspection and regulation arm of the Railroad Commission, it's like it's straight out of the '60s. We need to bring that arm of the Railroad Commission into 2022. We need to be doing trend and data based inspections, using data analytics to understand what we have going on, whether it's worker safety, aging pipelines. We need to have a database that whenever that inspector shows up on site, he has a laser guided approach of what he's looking for, what he thinks he's looking for, and then we just build those trends and we resolve those issues by constantly looking for them and ensuring that they're fixed until we no longer have them. And finally, the data collection for the Railroad Commission, I would digitize that, ensuring that didn't matter where in Texas you are, if you've got an issue with the Railroad Commission, you want to look and see if you have wells on your property or a pipeline undergoing, or just the history of your property and what's been done out there, that you'll be able to do that from the comfort of your own home instead of having to go all the way to Austin and go down in the basement and look through microfilm.
Okay, got you. So, I guess one question I would ask for you to do, and since you obviously the grid sounds like it's a pretty passionate subject for you, and that seems a little sore on you, or crow in your side. Uh, the grid. Could you give a very real quick layman's background on what happened there? And when I say that, you speak like you're talking to someone that isn't in the oil industry, to kind of explain
Okay.
to the layman's what happened in that situation.
All right. So what happened with the grid during Winter Storm Uri? We had renewable resources, which was accounting for anywhere between 12 to 19% of the load. I just lost my words there. So renewables was about 12 to 19% of the grid during Winter Storm Uri. They went down because the wind. It was too cold. The turbines weren't working. So that was the first thing that kind of happened right there.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that happened is, some of the natural gas resources started to freeze up, but we were well within what we needed to generate more power. But we had a little bit of a pinch on the grid, meaning we were close, but we didn't quite have enough electricity. So they started doing the rolling blackouts. You remember, hey, you're going to be without power for an hour or two. Do you remember when they were saying that? Well, when they started doing this, they started cutting off businesses and different entities that they deemed not critical. ERCOT cut off a large portion of the natural gas resources, wellheads, compressor stations that brought natural gas to the natural gas power plants, which account for 57.1% of our power generation. Like that's over half of our electrical load comes from natural gas. So they do that. They start cutting off the power to these resources. They start freezing up. So they lose, 55% of the natural gas resources is suddenly gone from the grid. So this causes the natural gas prices to spike 300% to what they normally are. So now not only do the electrical companies worry about, hey, am I going to be able to get the load to support the grid to keep Texans in power, to keep us warm. They've also got to figure out, well, now, the cubic foot of gas is 300 times what it was 3 days ago. So now they're having to balance in the cost of keeping themselves in business versus am I able to generate enough power versus will we still be a company after this all happens?
Okay.
And that's really how Winter Storm Uri went from what should have been maybe rolling blackouts a couple of hours to us being to a near collapse of the grid.
Okay, and
I hope that was a good explanation.
Yeah,
it's really hard to explain.
The issue is that the one thing I discovered when I got to Texas and got into oil and gas and started making safety products for the oil and gas business is that it's an incredibly intricate and complicated thing. The oil and gas industry. There's a lot of people who believe that there's a straight drill going into the ground and then put a pipe in there and it just comes straight up. I mean, in the country, and unfortunately, they don't understand just how incredible the people are out there, the engineering that goes into this. And so it's a complicated process all around, especially when you start trying to service a grid with different types of energy sources. And, I guess the one downside that we learned about renewables is that it's not really easily storable, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So that's, that's the issue with that. And I think it's hard for people to understand and get their hand around. But Dwayne, when things are difficult to understand, that makes it almost candy for people for misinformation out there about it. For people with bad agendas to go out there and try to manipulate it to the public. And so, what I wanted to do and what I aim to do is like, okay, what really happened and what's really the fault and how's it going to be fixed? And, I don't know if there's any fix for freezing windmills, but the winterization part, I don't know what that entails. If you could, kind of give a brief summary of what would the winterization of the natural gas hubs, what would that be, and what do these companies need to do?
I mean, they need, the first thing is they got to keep their equipment in good working order. It varies from what we're talking about. If we're talking about a power plant, or if we're talking about a compressor station, or if we're talking about a wellhead. But I'll just talk about it generally, okay?
Okay.
So, I mean, you can add glycol, methanol. You can wrap the systems up. We could talk 30 minutes about it and still not get down to every way to winterize. But basically, it means one way to winterize is to keep the power on. Don't cut it out when we're having a shortage of power available on the grid. Just start with those simple steps of, wrapping up key infrastructure, whether it's your wellhead, adding some glycol to it. There's just numerous other ways to do it, but that's the beginnings of it.
Can you hear me, Dwayne?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I thought you cut out there for a second. Okay, so the grid, obviously that's a pain point for a lot of Texans. Something that absolutely has to be solved. That absolutely was not. That was certainly not done properly over the winter storm. And as a guy that discusses environmental issues on this podcast, you know, there also becomes a political question and a trade off question on issues like this, and I don't think we did a very good job of that because I think most people are in modern society are a little more emotionally driven than they used to be as far as attacking problems and solving problems. And one question has to be up and added. Is it what are we willing to do? How far do we need to go to prepare for 100-year storm? Like it's we got to at some point realize that freak weather is going to happen, and do we adjust so much that we prepare for something that happens once every 100 or so years? I'm not asking you to comment on that, but that's kind of something that that I thought of in my mind is what are the trade-offs for that? Are we going to put companies underwater?
No, absolutely not. For how bad it was last year, I don't expect the standard to be to meet that. I expect the standard to be able to handle 3 days sub 25-degree weather, which is not 100-year storm. Like we get that about every 2 or 3 years. This year we've had it a couple different times. When was it back in December when we had that 2-day cold snap of below 25? You remember that?
Yes. Yeah.
We lost 25% of our natural gas production in those 2 days. I don't want to put a standard out there or tax these industries that go under. Because like I said at the beginning, job creation is the most important thing to me. Making Texas lives better. But if we have a 2 or 3 day cold snap or a 4-day cold snap of 25-degree weather, we don't need to be in fear of losing the natural gas resources that account for 57.1% of our power production.
Okay, great. Yeah, I get that. It's just a tough thing to discuss politically because anybody running for a political office, it's tough to have real answers to questions that deserve real answers because it's so easy to spin and people don't like to have tough conversations as a matter of fact. So, I appreciate you commenting on that. That's actually my opinion, just to be clear that, sometimes you don't prepare for the absolute worst because it's not worth it in the long term. So, moving on, pipelines. One subject that was broached was the pipeline inspection. How old are they? Who is responsible for it? How good of a job are we doing? And just to be clear with you, the Texas Railroad Commission is responsible ultimately for these pipelines that are in the ground out there. Correct?
Absolutely, they are over interstate commerce.
Okay, and how good of a job are we doing? And what do we need to do to get better at that and to bring us up to where we need to be to ensure the public safety?
Well, how good a job are they doing? I've spoken to several former and current our Railroad Commission employees, and it just seems like they go out there with a checklist of a pipeline, a general pipeline, instead of attacking it from a database, trend-based place. How can they do it better? If you know who made the pipeline, who the service company is, how old it is, you start building a database trend of the common issues that you have seen on it, what we would believe is happening on it, and then repeat. If you're dealing with a major pipeline company, you have repeated things that are constantly happening with it, and then you key on it and you improve the company's actions, how well we're serving Texans, and we do it through an efficient database, trend-based analytics. And that sounds really confusing, but let's just put it this way, right? If you're a mechanic and you work on Chevys all day, and you know a Chevy that's from 96 has a compressor problem, and that they have other common problems, when you see another Chevy come in, you have a checklist of things that you want to look at because you know that these are common occurrences, common problems, and it allows you to be proactive with how you service, maintain, recommend to the owners of it. I want to take that kind of data trend-based uh, path forward with the inspection and regulation arm of the Railroad Commission.
Okay. And you said something that kind of caught me there. You said if they know who's responsible for it, and I'm guessing you're meaning in the happening of a company that say goes out of business, no longer exists. Who is responsible for that pipeline at that point?
The Texas taxpayers. But when I said that, I was more meaning with which contractor built it.
Okay.
You know, just like with anything, whoever makes it, they have a tendency to do things certain ways, and I would want that factored into the inspection.
Okay, could you kind of clarify that a little bit? Is different constructors build the pipelines differently. You think the inspectors need to know that? Is there no? Are they given a standard by the Texas Railroad Commission that says that these?
There's a standard given, but I mean we're going really deep in here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just like anything. I want to if I'm coming out there when I worked for the insurance company and I went out to inspect assets or review operations, I wanted to know the who, what, when, and where of who made it. Because the more you know, you learn how they did things, reoccurring issues. If I'm not going to name any pipelines out, but what I'm saying is that any business has a tendency of the way they do stuff, and I want to use their tendencies to build a more targeted approach. So that it's twofold. It helps us. It knows that what they've had previous going on and what's more likely to go on, and it allows us to do a more efficient inspection.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. I really appreciate the idea that you're the data driven to to be more efficient, more accurate. I really like your approach there. Another subject that had been kind of brought up to my a little bit to me and talked about in the past was the idea of orphaned and abandoned wells, and I realize that is obviously 100% under the peer review of the Texas Railroad Commission. There's a difference between those two, right? Orphaned. Can you define orphaned and then abandoned wells for the audience?
Yeah, so orphaned wells are ones that don't have an owner. Either their owners went derelict or it's been lost through the years of time and there's just not good paperwork. Abandoned wells are ones that are still technically owned by an exploration company, but they've been cemented, they've been plugged and abandoned, which means that they've completed their life cycle or usefulness as exploration for oil or natural gas. They've been plugged and cemented, and just they're finished with them.
Okay, and okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. I just sniffled.
Okay. Yeah. So what are the dangers of these wells? And to me, what I learned is the danger is that if a company builds these wells, if they drill these wells and they go under, they are no longer an entity that exists. Well, that becomes the state's problem, and so what is I guess I'd start with this question: what are the dangers of some of these wells?
Well, I mean, they become a huge tax liability for us as Texans. That's a huge danger in my book. But I mean, once some of these wells are from back to the 40s,
Wow.
1940s, and we don't have since some of these are that old, we don't have a good idea of how many is out there. The dangers that are from these is that that there's if we don't have a good idea of what's out there, we don't know how to. I'm sorry about that. The dangers of it is that we don't know what's out there. We don't know if the plug and abandonment is still holding. If the ones that have been used as saltwater injection sites, if that's contaminating the groundwater or putting pressure on other parts in other wells. We really don't have a great idea of what liabilities we have out there in the abandoned and orphan wells. It runs the gamut of seismic problems like they've had out in West Texas, water contamination. It just runs the gamut of the issues from it.
What can we do to it sounds like there needs to be an accounting of it. Is that the Railroad Commission's responsibility to do
Yes,
that?
it is. It is. There needs to be, so like all the things that I've talked about, the data collection, the overhaul and the inspection regulation arm, it's all driven to, these goals that we've been talking about through this is doing things better, knowing what we have out there, building trend-based data analytic driven protocols and methodologies to understand what we have out there, what we're going to do, and how we're going to do it. And we need this use in what's going out there in West Texas with the abandoned orphan wells. We should have been using it, 6 months ago about the seismic issue because of all the over-injected wells out there. If I'd been the guy then, we wouldn't have had to go to all stop because about 6 to 9 months beforehand, I would have mandated that we reduced the seismic injections by 30% a day. And if that didn't slow down the seismic activity, I would have bumped it up another 10% until we got to a good level where the seismic activity was leveling out. And we found out what the formations and would handle instead of just having to go to an all stop because nobody wanted to stand up and say, hey, there's a problem there. Let's address that problem.
Okay, great. So, that's really good information there. That's I like, that's a real world problem. That's a real specific problem. And I think that's clear to understand. So thank you for sharing that one with us. The tax problem, I like that you bring that up because, like this is, a podcast based on safety and, and environment, but that's a real issue too. What can be done to avoid the issue becoming a tax liability for the state of Texas and obviously by default the citizens of Texas?
Well, I mean, so we can keep better records to start out. We could task people to go through these records, the data collection. If we digitize those, we'll have a whole lot better chance of going back through and finding out who the operators were and hold those operators accountable. We need to have a better control protocol of whenever exploration is done, whenever injection wells are done, we keep a better track of who that is. And if we think that a company's going under, we need to ensure that we've got the funds there before they go under to take care of these wells.
Okay. So I'm a little bit taken aback by what you're saying and you're saying that the Texas Railroad Commission, I can't go there and have a searchable database of all the abandoned wells in the state of Texas. That can't happen.
Yeah, but the older ones you cannot. You'll have to go down. I mean, what do you call it a database? You talking about going down there and looking through microfilm? You can do that.
Well, gosh, man, I really hope that isn't the case. But I would have thought there would be a little more. That's very disappointing to hear that there's not an easy database to look through these. Like there is no reason to me why if an inspector from the Texas Railroad Commission, comes to a well that's been cemented and plugged and looks at it and there should be something identifying it. So they should have a computer that they could go to and go, okay, well, this is well 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and plug that up and see who was responsible for it, who built it, and who was the operator. I mean, it sounds like you're telling me that's not something that can
The
be
older
done right now.
world is not the case. I
Wow.
mean, you had Miss Stogner on the other day. I'm sure she talked about how they had to go do a ton of research in the basement of the Railroad Commission to dig up the data on what was going on in Crane County, right? I'm sure she mentioned that.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So I mean, that's proof right there that they don't have it all digitized.
Boy, that's bordering on dereliction of duty, and I hate to throw an opinion like that out there, but that's tough to swallow. That's that they're not more advanced than that, and they hadn't been more on top of things to that. Because I mean, that's almost like the little meme you see out there. You had one job, and they're certainly not doing that one job. So, okay, well, Dawayne, I appreciate your time. This is alarming sounding the alarm bells on what's possible out there. You connected what you thought was the issues on both sides of the thing, and that's the environmental side and also the tax side, the what's protecting the citizen side, so that because the Texas Railroad Commission is not is not a one pronged job. You've got things that you're responsible for, and you've got to balance them, and that's the key, right? Balancing jobs, balancing the environment, because everything can't be about the environment. You can't go 100% about the environment. You can't go 100% about jobs. So what you said about that, I appreciate, and I like how you I appreciate you articulating what you're planning on doing. If you're elected, can you real quickly give the audience how they can find more information about you and your stated policy?
Also, yeah, absolutely. So my website is tiptonfortexas.com. If you want real-time info of what my posts or anything else, you can check out my social medias, which is on Facebook, it's tiptonfortexas.com. On Twitter, it is Tipton and number 4 Texas.com. Hey, before I let you go, as in any job, the Railroad Commission is really important. But we need people up there that's going to do the right things for the right reasons. We talked about some of the problems that are facing the Railroad Commission and Texas Oil and Gas. Please go out and vote and make sure you vote for the right people that are going to do the right things.
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Dawayne. People have the information where they can learn more about you. I appreciate your time. Like I said, we're committed to the environment and safety here, and you spoke a lot on that, and I really appreciate it. And good luck in the election, sir.
Thank you very much.
Have a great one.
You too.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show and accept the mission. Please subscribe to the Mission Zero podcast on your preferred streaming service and be sure to give us a 5-star review.